The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Miller's Roadhouse, a truck stop diner that had been serving travelers along Interstate 40 for 37 years. The building showed its age in the faded paint and weathered wood siding, but inside, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee mixed with the sound of quiet conversation and clinking silverware. It was the kind of place where regulars knew each other's names, where truckers could count on a hot meal and a friendly smile, and where strangers were treated like old friends. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At table 12, Sarah Chen moved with practiced grace despite the prosthetic leg that had replaced the one she lost in Afghanistan 3 years ago. 26 years old, former Army medic, she'd traded battlefield trauma for the simple dignity of honest work. Her smile was genuine, her service impeccable, and her spirit unbroken by a world that often saw her disability before her humanity. She had no idea that in the next hour, her quiet strength would awaken something fierce and protective in 12 men who understood what it meant to be judged by appearances. Men who knew that real courage isn't always loud, and real strength sometimes walks with a limp. If you believe that dignity matters more than appearances, and that real heroes come in unexpected forms, hit that subscribe button. This story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated, and for those who understand that protecting others isn't about size or strength, it's about character. Sarah had been on her feet since 5 a.m., working the breakfast rush with the kind of efficiency that comes from military training and genuine care for others. The prosthetic leg, a state-of-the-art model she'd received at Walter Reed, had become as much a part of her as the small scar above her. Left eyebrow from the IED blast that changed her life forever. She wore her prosthetic without shame. No long pants to hide it, no self-conscious adjustments. Sarah had learned in the hardest way possible that life was too precious to waste hiding from people's stares. The leg was titanium and carbon fiber, engineered precision wrapped in determination. Some customers noticed it and saw limitation. Others saw what it really was, a testament to survival, service, and refusing to give up. The morning regulars knew Sarah's story. They'd watched her start at Miller's 18 months ago, fresh out of physical therapy, learning to balance plates while relearning to balance herself. They'd seen her bad days when phantom pain made her grip the counter until her knuckles went white, and they'd celebrated her good days when her laugh filled the entire diner. Tom Henderson, a retired trucker who'd been coming to Miller's for 15 years, always requested Sarah's section. Not out of pity, but because she remembered that he took his eggs over easy and his coffee black, and because she asked about his granddaughter's softball games. Real questions, real interest. Morning, sunshine. Tom called out as Sarah approached his table, coffee pot already in hand. Morning, Mr. Henderson. How'd Emma do at her game yesterday? His weathered face broke into a grin. 3 RBIs and a stolen base. Kid's got wheels like her old grandpa used to. Sarah poured his coffee with steady hands, the prosthetic adjusting automatically to distribute her weight. She gets that competitive spirit from somewhere. I'm betting it wasn't from her grandmother. Tom laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. You got that right. Louise would rather read than run any day of the week. This was Sarah's gift. Not just remembering orders, but remembering people. In a world that increasingly moved past connection, she created it, one conversation, one smile, one moment of genuine interest at a time. The rumble started low and distant, like thunder rolling across the Arizona desert. Then it grew louder, closer, until 12 Harley-Davidsons roared into the parking lot in perfect formation. Chrome gleamed in the morning sun. Pipes echoed off the diner's walls, and heads turned toward the windows as the engines shut down in synchronized silence. The Desert Riders MC, not the outlaws the movies portrayed, but working men who rode together, stood together, and lived by a code older than any law book. Their leather vests carried patches that told stories. Vietnam veteran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Semper Fi, in memory of. These weren't weekend warriors playing dress-up. These were men who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd seen enough of the world to know that respect was earned, not demanded. Leading them was Jack Iron Horse Martinez, 54 years old, a Vietnam veteran who'd lost half his left hand to shrapnel in Da Nang. The prosthetic fingers moved with mechanical precision as he removed his helmet, revealing silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much but somehow retained their warmth. Behind him rode Mike Wrench Thompson, an electrician who volunteered at the VA hospital every weekend. Tommy Doc Williams, a paramedic who'd saved more lives than he could count. Steve Preacher Johnson, a high school history teacher who coached wrestling and mentored at-risk kids. Carlos Diesel Ramirez, a retired police sergeant who now ran a youth boxing program. Men who understood sacrifice. Men who recognized strength in unexpected places. Men who had zero tolerance for cruelty disguised as privilege. They filed into Miller's Roadhouse and claimed their usual corner, 4 tables pushed together, the way they'd done every third Saturday for 8 years. The Desert Riders Table, as the staff had come to call it. Sarah approached with coffee and menus, that warm, genuine smile lighting up her face. "Good morning, gentlemen. You're running a little early today." Jack studied her face for a moment, the way he always did. Not the intrusive stare of someone gawking at her prosthetic, but the careful attention of someone who noticed when people were carrying weight they shouldn't have to carry alone. Today, something in Sarah's eyes looked different. A weariness that went deeper than a busy morning shift. "Roads were clear," he said simply. "Coffee smells better than usual." "Same recipe we've always used," Sarah replied, starting to pour. "But I'll take the compliment." As she moved around the table, Jack noticed the slight hitch in her step that hadn't been there last month. The prosthetic was functioning perfectly. He could tell from the smooth, engineered movement. But something else was off. Tension in her shoulders. The way she held her head just slightly lower than usual. The Desert Riders had been coming to Miller's long enough to know most of the staff's stories. They knew Sarah was former military, knew about Afghanistan, knew about the leg. What they didn't know was what had happened 3 days ago in the parking lot after her evening shift. What they didn't know was why Sarah had been sleeping with her car keys in her hand and checking her rearview mirror every 30 seconds on the drive to work. Some stories, the important ones, had to be witnessed to be understood. The black Escalade pulled into the parking lot at 8:47 a.m., taking up 2 spaces and parking so close to the handicapped spot that anyone actually needing it would have had to squeeze between the vehicles. The engine was still running when the driver's door opened, and out stepped Richard Blackstone III, 42 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in 2 months. Richard was everything money could buy and privilege could create, but nothing character could build. He was the kind of man who'd inherited wealth, position, and the dangerous belief that having more meant being worth more. His father owned 3 car dealerships across Arizona. His grandfather had been a state senator, and Richard himself sat on the boards of 2 charities he'd never volunteered for and 1 hospital he'd never visited. He walked into Miller's Roadhouse like he was inspecting property he was considering purchasing and finding it beneath his standards. His phone was already pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "No, no, no. I specifically said the Mercedes needed to be ready by 9. Do you understand what specifically means?" He paused, listening to whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end of the call. "I don't care about your other customers. Do you know who I am?" The diner's usual morning chatter quieted slightly. Not completely. Miller's had seen its share of difficult customers over the years, but enough that the regular customers exchanged the kind of glances that said they were preparing for entertainment or trouble, depending on how things went. Richard chose a table directly in the center of the dining room, the kind of spot that ensured everyone would witness whatever performance he was planning to give. He didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, surveying the diner like a general reviewing troops he found lacking. Sarah finished taking an order from a family with 2 young children and approached Richard's table with menus and water. She'd learned to read people quickly in her months at Miller's, and something about this man's posture, his expression, the way he looked through her rather than at her, set off every alarm bell her military training had installed. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Miller's. Can I start you with some coffee?" Richard held up one finger, not in a just-a-moment gesture, but in a "you will wait while I finish this important call" dismissal. Sarah stood there, balancing the water, glasses, and menus, while Richard continued his conversation for another full minute. At the Desert Riders table, Jack's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Around him, 11 other men noticed the same thing. The way Sarah stood perfectly still, professionally patient, while being treated like hired help rather than a human being providing service. Tommy Doc Williams set down his menu. He'd seen this before. The casual dehumanization that people with money sometimes displayed toward people without it. The assumption that working in service meant being servile. Mike Wrench Thompson's jaw tightened. His daughter was Sarah's age, working her way through nursing school by waitressing at night. He taught her to work hard, be respectful, and never accept being disrespected in return. Richard finally ended his call and looked up at Sarah with the expression of someone who just noticed an appliance had been running too long. "Coffee. Black. And I need to see a menu, obviously." "Of course, sir." Sarah set down the water and menu, pulled out her order pad. "Any preference on breakfast?" "Our special today is, I'll read the menu myself, thanks." "Just bring the coffee." Sarah returned with the coffee pot and a clean cup. As she poured, Richard opened his laptop on the table, completely ignoring her presence. The coffee was perfect. Miller's took pride in their blend, roasted locally and brewed fresh every 2 hours. But Richard took one sip, and his face twisted like he'd been served motor oil. "What is this supposed to be?" "That's our house blend, sir. Fresh pot, made about 20 minutes ago. It's burnt. Bring me something that doesn't taste like it came from a gas station." Sarah's smile never wavered, though something flickered behind her eyes. "I'd be happy to brew a fresh pot. Would you prefer our medium roast instead? It's a little smoother. I'd prefer coffee that was made correctly the first time." At table 12, Tom Henderson stopped mid-bite of his eggs. In 15 years of coming to Miller's, he'd never had a bad cup of coffee. The owner, Frank Miller, was particular about his coffee, the way some people were particular about their cars. It was a point of pride. Sarah disappeared into the kitchen and returned 5 minutes later with a fresh cup from a different pot. Richard took a sip, considered it like a wine expert evaluating a vintage, and shook his head. "Still burnt. Is there anyone here who actually knows how to make coffee?" "Sir, I'd be happy to get my manager." "I don't want your manager. I want coffee that doesn't taste like garbage." "This is supposed to be a restaurant, right? Not some truck stop that gave up trying?" The words hung in the air, like smoke. Miller's Roadhouse was, technically, a truck stop, had been for 37 years. But it was the kind of truck stop where drivers detoured 50 miles just for Frank's meatloaf and Maria's apple pie. The kind of place where the coffee was so good that the mayor came in every Tuesday for a cup and a slice of whatever pie was fresh. Sarah's professionalism never cracked, but Jack noticed her grip tighten slightly on the coffee pot handle. The subtle shift in weight, as she compensated for tension that shouldn't have been there. "I apologize, sir. Let me try a different blend entirely. We have a light roast that might be more to your taste. Forget the coffee. Just bring me egg whites, whole wheat toast, and fresh fruit. And make sure the fruit is actually fresh, not some canned nonsense." Sarah wrote down the order, her handwriting as neat and precise as her posture. "Absolutely, sir. Anything else?" "Yeah. Try to get it right the first time." She nodded and headed toward the kitchen, her gait steady despite the prosthetic. But Jack had been watching people under stress for 40 years, and he could see the micro-adjustments, the tiny compensations that meant someone was fighting to maintain control. The order came out perfectly 12 minutes later. Egg whites fluffy and properly cooked, whole wheat toast golden brown, fresh strawberries and melon arranged attractively on the side. Sarah set the plate down with the same care she'd shown every customer that morning. Richard cut into the egg whites, took one bite, and his expression shifted from bored indifference to theatrical disgust. "These are overcooked." Sarah glanced at the plate. The egg whites were exactly as they should be, set but not rubbery, light, and properly seasoned. "Sir, I can have the kitchen remake them if, of course, you can remake them. The question is why I have to ask. Do you people not know how to cook eggs?" The diner was quieter now. Conversations hadn't stopped entirely, but people were listening. The family, with 2 children, glanced over nervously. The truckers at the counter exchanged looks. At the desert rider's table, 12 men sat with the kind of stillness that comes before action. Richard pushed the plate away from him with enough force that it slid across the table and stopped just short of falling off the edge. "This is exactly what I expected from a place like this." Sarah reached for the plate. "I'll get this fixed right away, sir." "A place like what?" The voice came from behind Richard, calm and level. Jack Martinez had stood up from his table and walked over, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be talked out of it. Richard looked up, taking in the leather vest, the patches, the silver beard, and the eyes that had seen combat. For just a moment, something like calculation flickered across his features. Then privilege reasserted itself. "Excuse me? You said a place like this. I'm curious what you meant by that." Richard's mouth curved into the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I'm in a place where the staff doesn't seem to understand basic customer service. But I don't see how that's any of your business." Jack glanced at Sarah, who was still standing there, holding the rejected plate, her professional mask firmly in place, but something vulnerable showing around the edges. Then he looked back at Richard. "That woman has served me coffee probably 50 times over the past couple years. Best service I've ever had anywhere. So when someone suggests she doesn't understand her job, that becomes my business." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just want breakfast that's edible." "No trouble at all," Jack said easily, just wondering if maybe the problem isn't the food. Richard's face flushed. He was accustomed to deference, to people backing down when he applied pressure. The idea that someone might question his judgment, might suggest he was the problem, was so foreign that it took him a moment to process. "I think you need to mind your own business, old man." "Sarah," Jack said, not taking his eyes off Richard. "How long you been working here?" 18 months, sir." "Any other customers complain about the coffee today?" "No, sir. Not today or any day this week." Jack nodded. "Egg whites look perfectly cooked to me, too. But then, I'm not an expert on fine dining." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is harassment. I'm trying to have breakfast." "And you're right," Jack interrupted. "You're trying to have breakfast, and Sarah's trying to serve it to you. But instead of eating, you're making a show out of criticizing food that's probably better than what you get at most places in Phoenix. Do you know who I am?" The question came out louder than Richard intended, carrying that particular pitch of entitlement that assumes recognition will solve problems. Jack studied him for a moment, taking in the expensive clothes, the carefully styled hair, the soft hands that had never done manual labor. "Should I?" Richard's flush deepened. "My family owns Blackstone Motors. 3 dealerships. My father personally knows the governor." "Good for your father," Jack said mildly. "But right now, you're just a customer in a diner, treating a good woman badly for no reason I can see." At this point, Sarah tried to intervene. "Gentlemen, please. I can remake the order. It's really no problem." "Sarah." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't need to fix what isn't broken." Richard laughed, but it came out harsh and brittle. "Are you seriously going to lecture me about customer service? I'm the customer here. Being a customer doesn't give you the right to be cruel." "Cruel?" Richard's voice cracked slightly. "I complained about overcooked eggs. That's not cruel. That's honest feedback." Jack gestured towards Sarah. "Look at her and tell me that's all you did." For the first time, Richard actually looked directly at Sarah. Really looked, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. That might have been recognition of her humanity. The moment passed quickly, replaced by defensive anger. I don't have to justify my standards to some biker gang. Motorcycle club, Jack corrected calmly. And you're right, you don't have to justify anything to us. But you might want to think about what kind of man you're choosing to be in this moment. Richard grabbed his laptop and stood up. I'm choosing to be the kind of man who doesn't eat in places where the customers get harassed by thugs. He turned to leave, and that should have been the end of it. A difficult customer leaving, a situation diffused, everyone moving on with their morning. But Richard couldn't resist one final shot. As he passed Sarah, he stopped and looked down at her prosthetic leg, his gaze deliberately obvious, deliberately invasive. Maybe if you focus more on learning to walk properly, you'd be better at carrying plates without spilling things. The words cut through the diner like a blade. Every conversation stopped completely. The family with children stared in shock. The truckers at the counter turned around. Even the cook in the kitchen, who'd been clattering pans, went silent. Sarah stood frozen, the rejected plate still in her hands. Her face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. Not because of embarrassment about her prosthetic, but because of the casual cruelty, the deliberate attempt to wound her where she was most vulnerable. Jack Martinez had been in combat. He'd seen friends die, had killed enemies, had faced down armed men in dark alleys and hostile bars. But in 40 years of hard living, he'd rarely felt the kind of cold, focused rage that flooded through him in that moment. What did you say? Richard turned back, and for the first time, something like fear flickered in his eyes. But pride and privilege are powerful drugs, and he'd been using both for so long that stopping felt impossible. You heard me. Maybe if she wasn't trying to do a job she's not physically capable of. Richard never saw Jack move. One moment the older man was standing 3 feet away. The next he was close enough that Richard could smell leather and motor oil and something dangerous. You need to leave, now. I was already leaving. No. Jack's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You were making it worse. There's a difference. Behind Jack, 11 other men had stood up from their table. Not aggressively, not forming a circle or making threats. Just standing, just present, just making it clear that Jack wasn't alone in his assessment of the situation. Richard looked around the diner and realized that every single person was staring at him. Not with the kind of attention he was used to commanding, but with disgust, with disapproval, with a particular contempt reserved for people who kick others when they're down. He tried to salvage something from the moment. This is assault. I'm calling the police. Call them, Jack said easily. Tell them you came into a diner, insulted a disabled veteran, and 12 witnesses saw the whole thing. She's not a veteran. Army medic, Sarah said quietly. Afghanistan. 2 tours. The silence that followed was complete. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. Richard looked at Sarah's prosthetic leg with new understanding, and for just a moment, genuine shame flickered across his face. But pride is a powerful thing, especially in people who've built their entire identity around being better than others. Instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging what he'd done, Richard doubled down. I don't care what she is. I paid for service, and I didn't get it. That's the bottom line. Jack studied Richard's face for a long moment, reading the fear beneath the bluster. The way privilege crumbled when it met something it couldn't buy or intimidate. You're going to leave now, Jack said. You're going to pay for what you ordered, tip appropriately, and walk out of here. And you're never coming back. You can't ban me from a public restaurant. I'm not banning you. Frank Miller had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a big man, soft around the middle now, but with the kind of presence that came from 37 years of running a business built on respect and good food. I am. Frank looked at Richard with the expression of someone who'd found something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. You insulted one of my employees. In my restaurant. You attacked a woman who served this country, who works harder than you've probably ever worked in your life, and who shows up every day with a smile despite carrying burdens you couldn't imagine. Frank moved closer to Richard, his voice staying level but carrying unmistakable authority. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay your bill, apologize to Sarah, and leave. And if I ever see you in here again, I'll call the police myself and have you trespassed." Richard looked around the diner one more time. Every face showed the same expression, not hatred, exactly, but something worse. Disappointment. The particular sadness that comes from watching someone choose to be smaller than they have to be. He pulled out his wallet, threw a $20 bill on the table, and headed for the door. But Jack's voice stopped him one last time. "You forgot something." Richard turned back, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. The apology. For a moment, it seemed like Richard might actually do it. Might find some remnant of decency buried under years of privilege and entitlement. Might remember that the woman he'd attacked had served her country, had sacrificed more than he'd ever been asked to sacrifice, had earned respect through service while he'd inherited it through accidents of birth. Instead, he walked out without another word. The silence that followed was different from the one during the confrontation. This was the silence of a community processing what it had witnessed, of good people trying to understand how someone could be so deliberately cruel. Sarah still stood where she'd been, holding the plate, tears finally spilling over despite her efforts to maintain composure. Not tears of shame about her prosthetic, but tears of anger and hurt that someone could look at her service, her sacrifice, her daily courage, and choose to see only limitation. Jack turned to her, his voice gentle again. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice yet. "You serve this country with honor," Jack continued. "You serve this community with dignity. And what that man said doesn't change either of those things." Around the diner, other customers began to speak up. Tom Henderson was the first. 18 months I've been watching you work, Sarah. Never seen you spill so much as a drop of coffee." That man was talking nonsense. The family with children approached. The mother, a woman about Sarah's age, spoke quietly. "My brother lost his arm in Iraq. I know courage when I see it. Thank you for your service." One by one, customers came over, not to gawk or offer pity, but to show support. To make it clear that Richard's words didn't represent them, didn't represent their community, didn't represent anything decent or true. The Desert Riders approached last. Jack spoke for all of them. "We come here every third Saturday because the food's good and the people are better. You're part of what makes this place special. Don't let one ignorant man make you forget that." Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tears. "Thank you, all of you. But you didn't have today." "Yes, we did," Jack interrupted gently. "That's what community means. That's what service means. Looking out for each other." Frank Miller appeared with a fresh cup of coffee and set it in front of Jack. "Breakfast is on the house today, gentlemen. All of you." Jack shook his head. "That's not necessary, Frank. Maybe not necessary. But it's right." As the morning progressed, word of what had happened spread through the small trucking community that made Miller's Roadhouse a regular stop. By evening, the story had reached other diners, other truck stops, other places where working people gathered and shared news. Within a week, Sarah noticed a change. More customers requested her section, specifically. Tips increased. People lingered longer in conversation, asking about her military service, sharing their own stories of family members who'd served. The Desert Riders started coming in more frequently, not every third Saturday, but every weekend. Not to guard Sarah. She didn't need protection, but to show that she was part of their extended community, part of the network of people they looked out for. Richard Blackstone III never returned to Miller's Roadhouse. His name became something of a cautionary tale in the area, the kind of story people told to illustrate the difference between having class and having character. But the real story wasn't about Richard's cruelty or even Jack's intervention. The real story was about what happened next, in the days and weeks that followed. About a community that saw one of its members attacked and responded not with violence or revenge, but with love, with support, with the simple, powerful message that some things, dignity, respect, basic human decency, are not negotiable. Sarah continued working at Miller's, saving money for the nursing degree she planned to pursue. She never forgot what Richard said, but she also never let it define her. Because she was surrounded by people who saw her clearly, not as a disabled veteran or a victim or a symbol, but as Sarah, a good woman, doing good work, deserving of respect not because of what she'd lost, but because of what she gave every day. And sometimes, in a world that often seems too harsh and too divided, that's enough. Sometimes protecting each other, standing up for each other, choosing community over indifference, sometimes that's everything. 6 months later, Jack Martinez was having breakfast at Miller's when Sarah approached with the coffee pot and that familiar warm smile. "Morning, Jack. Usual?" "Actually," he said, "I wanted to ask you something. My nephew's getting married next month. Could use some help with catering. You interested in some extra work?" Sarah's face lit up. "Absolutely. How many people?" "About 60. But here's the thing. It's not just about the money. My family, they've heard about you. About who you are, what you've done. They specifically asked if you'd be willing to help." Sarah set down the coffee pot and looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Why?" Jack smiled. "Because they know quality when they hear about it. Because they understand that some people, the people worth knowing, they judge character, not circumstances." Sarah nodded, understanding flooding her face. "I'd be honored." And in that moment, in that simple exchange between two people who understood service and sacrifice, and the importance of seeing each other clearly, the real victory was complete. Not over one cruel man's words, but over the idea that those words had any power at all. Because respect, real respect, isn't given or taken, it's earned. And some people, the people who matter, know the difference. Before you go, if you believe in standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, I need you to do 3 things. 1. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We find stories of everyday courage like this. 2. Share this video with someone who works in service. Let them know they matter. 3. Comment below. I'll be the Jack. Commit to being the person who speaks up next time you see injustice. That's how we change things. Not with violence, but with presence, with courage, with respect. And if you can't stand bullies who hide behind money and power, hit that like button. Let's show the algorithm that stories about character and consequence matter more than clickbait. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Now go be someone's Jack. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.